This is a question that comes from Dan in our class, Dan Anderson. Thank you for this good question. I'm going to read it and then offer a response. Dan writes this: in understanding King David's rape of Bathsheba and his possible or probable authorship of some of the Psalms, how does this impact our engagement with the scriptures attributed to David? Does the fact that such writings have been canonized change the way we approach such writings? This is a great question. And I have a couple of different angles that I want to take on it. First of all, I want to say that yes, the fact that Psalms of David have been canonized does affect how we engage those writings. Arguably, it's the reason why those writings have survived and come down to us. But I want to sort of speak to a preliminary matter first, which is that I want to avoid the implication that David offers us a kind of precedent for utilizing, receiving the writings of deeply corrupt people, as if we could just draw some kind of easy general parallel between David and any number of other sexual predators or people who've committed other atrocities. So that because David did some horrible things and we still read his writings, then we should therefore be able to read the writings of others who have also done horrible things. I want to avoid that implication because I think that the devil is in the details, as it were. It matters who the people are, what the atrocities in question are. It matters how their writings or voice has come down to us and what the currency of that voice is, et cetera. All of those matters, I think, are pertinent to making a judgment about whether or how we will engage certain writings. In the case of David in particular, there are a couple of things that I think we should keep in mind. First of all, I would say that even the fact that David's Psalms might be attributed to David in an honorary way, not necessarily that a claim that he authored them directly himself, that should not keep us, I don't think, from considering David's life, the things that he did, as relevant to our interpretation of Psalms attributed to him. How it's relevant, I think, is an open question, but I don't think we should deny that David's life is relevant to the Psalms of David and how we should interpret them. But then also important, I think, is the way that David's writings have been canonized. That they are canonized means that they're part of a larger body of literature, and that larger body of literature includes accounts, damning accounts of David that have not been hidden from the audience of the Psalms, but are present. And I think that is significant for how the Psalms are received. They're received together with narratives telling of the atrocities of this particular psalmist. Also significant, I think, is that the Psalms include expressions of David's own remorse for the terror that he wreaked upon people, the sins that he committed. And that's something, for example, that is absent from many others' writings, people who have committed atrocities in their life. And I have to say, it's something that's troublingly absent from both Yoder and Vanier. I don't know of any accounts that they offered in which they expressed regret, any will to repair, to go about repairing at least some of the damage that they had done. And so that's a real problem. And I think, to my mind, heightens our suspicion and intensifies our scrutiny of their writings, because they seem to be relatively oblivious to the harm that they were doing, not able to take responsibility for it in a clear way. And I expect that that is then expressed in their ideas in a way that we should criticize. So that's a consideration. The other one about canon, though, that I think is important is that canonization reflects an intergenerational communal process. And what that means is that the memory of David had undergone a process of reception by a community of people that also remembered his terrible crimes. And that process, I think, leaves readers with more resources in some ways for making sense of the legacy of those people and reading their writings with the right set of concerns. One of the difficulties that we're facing with Yoder and Vanier is that these sins were committed relatively recently, and the process of community that digests and tries to make sense of what we are going to do with the legacy of these men, that process is still very early, very young. And that leaves us, I think, with fewer resources in some ways to be able to know how we should engage their writings. So in some ways that further complicates the challenge of our class, because we don't have generations of people having digested the legacy of Yoder and Vanier to guide us in how to read what they wrote, if to read, whether to read what they wrote at all, and how we might read other sources alongside theirs that would help to frame their writings in a particular way, which is what we find in the canonization process, I think, of the Psalms of David. I suppose we could say that I'm attempting something like a kind of provisional initial canonization kind of sensitivity by trying to read these books by Yoder and partly by Vanier, but alongside reports, testimonies of the abuse that they committed, and also alongside other voices throughout the class that I expect to frame, condition, variously influence our interpretation of those two books in the class. So I'm sure that the effort to do that in our class is not just incomplete, but probably flawed in ways that I wouldn't necessarily attribute to the canon of Scripture. But I'm just, I guess, suggesting that what we see happening in the canon of Scripture might provide us at least some tentative guidance for how to go about wrestling with writers in the received intellectual canon that we are heirs to and have to figure out what we're going to do with. And I think some of the key lessons that we learn from the canon is the need for truthful expression of the sins that writers have committed when they have been egregious and they are writers of authority, and also that their voices would not lack framing by other voices that will serve to provide a helpful influence in the way that we receive the works of an author that is worthy of scrutiny for these reasons. So generally speaking, I guess I just want to reiterate that I think that we need to um, acknowledge the relevance of authors' lives to what they write. And in this case, in our class, I think that we should hopefully wisely use testimony about what they did as a means of criticizing the ideas that they wrote down.